Saudi Arabia, city of Medina. The sun had just set, and the sky still burned in shades of copper when Hassan ibn Karim, a religion teacher, returned from the mosque after Maghrib. Exhausted, he leaned back on the carpet, lay on his back, and closed his eyes. Just for a few minutes, he thought. But what came next made him wake up in pure terror. His chest felt heavy, his body wouldn't move, and the air seemed to vanish. Between panic and awareness, a voice echoed from the darkness. The messenger warned, "Do not sleep like this." That night, Hassan would understand that even the way one rests can reveal secrets of faith. Stay with me, because the reason will surprise you. Before we continue, make sure you're subscribed and tell us in the comments which city you're watching from. In the sacred region of Medina lived Hassan ibn Karim, a 52-year-old man known for his serenity and spiritual discipline. Everyone respected him for his calm voice when teaching the Quran to neighborhood children and for the way he cared for the orphans on the main street. His routine was simple and sacred. He woke before Fajr, spent his days between prayer and study, and at dusk he remained in dhikr, remembering Allah until Isha. But that week something was wearing him down. His body ached, his eyelids grew heavy, and the desert heat seemed to drain his strength. That afternoon, after helping an elderly neighbor and giving dates to his students, he returned home exhausted. His wife watched as he washed his hands and prepared for Maghrib. "Hassan," she said softly, "remember what the Prophet advised. Do not lie down after sunset. It's the time to guard the heart." He smiled, trying to reassure her. "Just for today, my dear. Tomorrow I'll return to my routine." The prayer ended, and the city sank into the quiet of twilight. The birds stopped calling, and a warm wind blew from the dunes. Hassan closed the door, put out the lamp, and for the first time in years, recited nothing before lying down. His body found rest too quickly, but his soul felt uneasy. In the dim light, the ticking clock echoed like the beating of his own heart. It was there, between sacredness and forgetfulness, that something began to move, not outside him, but within. The clock showed 6:45 p.m. The sky over Medina wore copper and violet tones. The street in front of Hassan's house was quiet. Only the faint echo of worshippers returning from the mosque broke the hot desert air. Inside, the smell of incense mixed with the sand carried by the wind, slipping through the cracks in the window. Hassan's wife had fallen asleep after prayer. Still dressed in his white tunic, he put out the lamp and lay on the folded rug he used as a mattress. His entire body begged for rest. He turned onto his back, crossed his hands over his chest, and closed his eyes with a faint sigh. Sleep came quickly, but not peacefully. A few minutes later, something changed. The air in the room seemed to cool, and a strange stiffness took hold of his muscles. His heart raced. He tried to move an arm, a leg, anything, nothing. It felt as if he were awake inside a sleeping body. His breathing shortened, and his chest felt crushed by an invisible weight. Outside, a dog barked and then went silent. Not even the sound of the wind came through anymore. Everything was still. The wall clock had stopped. The second hand was frozen between two marks, as if time itself had forgotten to move. Hassan tried to react, but fear overwhelmed him. A deep hum began to fill the room, like distant footsteps. Slow, dragging. The shadow appeared, not from one corner, but from all at once. It floated, without clear shape, only density. He tried to speak, "A'udhu billahi min ash-shaytanir rajim," but his tongue felt glued to his palate, unmoving. No sound came out. The darkness pulsed, alive. The cold deepened. Sweat rolled down, but his body remained paralyzed. His mind screamed. His heart begged for air. And then, a voice. It came neither from outside nor from within his head. It passed through him. "Do not sleep like this, son of Adam. The messenger warned you." The words were calm, not threatening, yet carried immense authority. The room brightened for an instant, not with visible light, but with a presence that drove away the shadow. Hassan gasped, his body free again. He sat up quickly, his tunic drenched in sweat. His heart pounded so hard it seemed to echo against the walls. He looked at the clock, 6:46 p.m. Only 1 minute had passed. Time, somehow, had not moved, but something within him had. Shaking, he stood and lit the lamp. The air was still, and the distant adhan from another mosque echoed as a reminder. For a moment he stood motionless, feeling his own body, and a fear he couldn't explain. He didn't yet know that this warning would be only the first of many. The lamp flickered, casting shadows on the walls as if the room were breathing. The wind began to blow through cracks Hassan knew were tightly sealed. The sound was different, not the natural whisper of the desert, but a steady hiss, almost like a whisper that matched his own breathing. Suddenly the air grew dense, his body stiffened again, and the weight on his chest returned with force. It felt as though something was watching him closely, just inches from his face. A chill ran down his spine, and the lamp's flame went out by itself. Everything went dark. In the middle of that silence, he heard a sound that confused him. A distant adhan, but it wasn't coming from the street or any nearby mosque. It was internal, echoing inside his skull. And at the very moment the last Allahu Akbar resounded in his mind, the pressure disappeared. Air returned, his chest expanded, and his body once again obeyed the command of his soul. Hassan stood up, breathless, stumbling toward the lamp. His hands trembled as he struck the match. The flame lit, and he saw his reflection in the wall mirror, pale, sweating, eyes wide open. The door burst open, and Aisha, his wife, rushed in. "By Allah, Hassan! You screamed in your sleep! I heard you from here!" He placed his hand on his forehead, trying to recall what he had felt. I can't explain. It was like something was holding me down, and I heard a voice, clear, firm, telling me not to sleep that way. She stepped closer, holding her prayer beads between her fingers. Her eyes, calm yet filled with fear, met his. The messenger warned about this. He said that right after Maghrib, the shayateen walk among men. It's a time to stay alert, not to surrender to sleep. He tried to hide the tremor in his voice. Maybe I was just exhausted, just dreams, nothing more. Aisha stayed silent for a few seconds. The wind had stopped, and only the ticking of the clock filled the air again. Finally, she whispered, "The body isn't always what gets sick first." Hassan looked away toward the carpet, deep in thought. The lamp's flame flickered, casting the trembling outline of his hands onto the wall. Outside, the call to Isha began to echo, and though his heart sought calm, something within him whispered that what had happened wasn't just a nightmare, it was a warning. The days that followed passed slowly, marked by a restlessness Hassan couldn't name. The sun still rose golden over Medina. The birds still sang at dawn, and the call to prayer still sounded as it always had. But inside him, something was different. Every evening, as the sky began to turn red, the same chill ran through him. It was a dry cold, internal, not from the air, from within. His heart raced for no reason. Sweat formed even in the mild temperature, and the silence of the house carried a strange weight. Even the ticking of the clock sounded louder, as if counting down to something unseen. His wife noticed. "You're pale, Hassan. You haven't slept well since that night." He tried to smile. "It's just an impression. Maybe I need some rest." But deep down, he knew it wasn't only fatigue. On the third night, unable to bear the unease, he sought out Sheikh Abdul Qadir, a scholar known for his wisdom and calm. The mosque was nearly empty when he arrived. The old sheikh sat near the mihrab, softly reciting Subhanallah. Hassan approached respectfully. "Sheikh, may I speak with you?" The man lifted his gaze, and the serene light in his eyes made Hassan feel safe. "Sit down, my son. What troubles you?" Hassan told him everything. The sleep, the pressure on his chest, the voice, and the feeling that returned each evening. The sheikh listened without interruption, his fingers quietly turning the beads of his misbahah. When the story ended, he asked gently, "You slept on your back, didn't you?" "Yes," Hassan replied, confused. The old man lowered his head and calmly quoted, "The Messenger of Allah taught us that sleeping right after Maghrib and sleeping on one's back are not beneficial for the body nor the soul. It is a time of vulnerability, when the angels record the deeds of the day and the shayateen seek out the heedless." Hassan frowned. "But how can something so simple be so serious?" The sheikh smiled softly. "Because nothing is simple when it concerns the heart. The Prophet wasn't speaking only of posture, but of spiritual state. Sleeping right after sunset is like closing your eyes to the hour when the unseen world awakens. Those who remember Allah remain protected. Those who surrender to sleep too soon forget to guard their souls." A gentle breeze crossed the courtyard at that moment. The mosque lamps swayed, casting shadows that danced across the tiles. The sheikh continued. "The early scholars said that the time between Maghrib and Isha is a bridge between two worlds, the physical and the spiritual. It's when the records are sealed and hidden forces move about. Sleeping on your back at that hour unbalances the body and opens the spirit." Hassan listened in silence, feeling the weight of each word. Everything made sense, yet fear mingled with curiosity. "And what if someone didn't know this?" he asked. "Allah is merciful. The warning itself is mercy. But to ignore the warning, that is ingratitude. The wind picked up, and the flames of the lamps flickered more intensely, casting golden reflections over the faces of the two men. The air seemed to hum. The sheikh closed his eyes and recited in a low tone, "And seek refuge in Allah, for He is the protector of those who remember." Hassan lowered his head. The master's words did not sound like mere advice. They felt like a reminder sent at the exact moment it was needed, and in that instant, he sensed that the cold following him wasn't fear. It was the awakening of conscience. The days that followed turned into a search. Hassan, who once taught Quran to children in the mornings, now spent his nights immersed in books. Fear had given way to curiosity, and beneath it, a thirst for understanding. Why had that voice warned him? Why did sleeping on his back at that exact hour carry such meaning? He began with medical records at the University of Medina, with the help of a young student from his mosque. Among reports and translated articles, something caught his attention. The human body slows drastically after sunset. Digestive enzymes decrease, heart rate drops, and blood flow centers around the abdomen. Sleeping on one's back right after eating, as he had done, could cause reflux, a suffocating sensation, and even small respiratory spasms. Doctors called it sleep paralysis, a phenomenon explained biologically, but which, curiously, many patients described as an invisible presence pressing on them. The coincidence made him pause. Subhanallah, the body confirms what faith already knew. He decided to dig deeper. He visited the old archives of the Central Library, where rare copies of classical texts were kept. Among the dust-covered shelves, he found a brown-covered volume titled Zad al-Ma'ad, the work of Imam Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah. He turned the pages carefully until a sentence underlined in blue ink made him stop. The believer's sleep is not mere rest, but a reflection of the soul's state. When the body surrenders too early to laziness, the heart weakens, and the whispers find their path. Hassan read those words over and over. It wasn't just about physiology, it was something deeper. The Imam described the same period between Maghrib and Isha as a time when the unseen world moves around the visible one. Back at the mosque, he spoke again with Sheikh Abdul Qadir, who listened attentively to his discoveries. So science says the body grows heavy, and faith says the soul grows too light. The sheikh summarized with a smile. Exactly. It seems balance is the secret, Hassan replied. But what I still don't understand is that voice. Was it my conscience, a warning, or something I can't explain? The old man tilted his head, thoughtful. When Allah wants to protect a servant, He sends signs in different forms, sometimes through dreams, sometimes through silence, and sometimes through the very fright itself. The words lingered. That night, Hassan returned home with a restless mind. He opened the Quran and read the verse, "And He is the one who takes your souls during sleep and knows what you have done during the day." Surah Al-An'am, 660. A shiver ran down his arms. The explanation was there, simple, profound, undeniable. Sleep was not absence, it was surrender, and whoever surrenders without remembering Allah opens the soul unguarded. The following days brought new confirmations. A local doctor, after hearing his story, remarked, "Interesting, Sheikh. Modern studies show that lying supine right after eating puts pressure on the phrenic nerve, making it hard to breathe and causing auditory hallucinations." Hassan smiled quietly. Hallucinations, or echoes of the unseen. The doctor laughed, unaware of the depth in his question. To him, the mystery was no longer merely physical. It was a bridge between worlds. Science explained the mechanism. Faith explained the purpose. The Prophet didn't need laboratories to understand what the body and soul could endure. That night, Hassan wrote in his notebook, "Sleep is a rehearsal for death. Whoever does it carelessly forgets that between breath and stillness there is a single instant, and in that instant Allah watches." He closed the book, extinguished the lamp, and stayed awake until Isha. The wind drifted through the window, gentle, almost tender. For the first time, he felt peace. But deep inside, one question still lived, pulsing like a distant echo. Why me? Why was I the one chosen to hear the warning? And that doubt would lead him to the revelation that changed everything. The sixth night came with an unfamiliar silence. The streets of Medina were calm. The warm breeze carried the scent of incense from the mosque's open windows. Hassan sat on the same prayer rug where he often performed dhikr, his prayer beads between his fingers and his heart steady. But something inside him longed for answers. The sun slowly disappeared, and the Maghrib adhan echoed between the minarets. Hassan recited the usual words, feeling each syllable vibrate in his chest. When he finished, he remained seated in meditation. Fatigue mingled with serenity, and without realizing, his eyes closed. Sleep wrapped around him like a light veil. But what came next was not an ordinary dream. The air around him felt too real. He stood in a vast golden field where the horizon blended into the light. No sound, except the gentle chant of distant voices. Ahead, a figure walked, the Prophet Muhammad, surrounded by a radiance that didn't blind, but warmed the soul. Behind him, thousands followed in reverent silence. Hassan tried to approach, but his steps were slow, as if the ground were made of air. Even so, the distance between him and the sacred figure grew smaller. Then he heard the words, clear, soft and firm, echoing though the Prophet's lips did not move. Stay awake after Maghrib, for it is the hour to guard the heart. The sound spread like an eternal echo. The crowds repeated it, and each voice carried the same vibration, like waves reaching the heavens. Hassan fell to his knees, weeping. His face was bathed in a warm light, and he understood. The warning he had heard days earlier was not punishment, it was mercy. It was Allah's call to those who had forgotten to remain awake while the spiritual world was in motion. Suddenly, the golden field dissolved. The light turned into shadow and the sound into breathing. He opened his eyes and was back in his room. The prayer beads were still in his hand, and his body leaned slightly forward, as if he had slept only for a moment. But the floor was wet. Tears. He looked at the clock. Only 15 minutes had passed since Maghrib. His heart pounded, but the peace inside him was new, deep, complete. The next morning, at sunrise, he walked to the mosque and found Sheikh Abdul Qadir on the veranda, watching the birds on the rooftops. "Sheikh," he said, his voice trembling, I saw him in a dream." The old man looked at him with serenity. "Whom did you see, my son?" "The messenger. He walked ahead of a multitude, and he said that Maghrib is the hour to guard the heart." The sheikh smiled gently. "Then now you know that what happened to you wasn't fear. It was an invitation." "An invitation?" "Yes. Allah awakens some servants through pain, others through vision. What matters is what they do after the warning." Hassan remained silent, feeling the truth in his teacher's words. The wind blew, and a dry leaf crossed the courtyard, landing on the prayer rug. He bent down, picked it up and placed it in his pocket, a reminder that even the smallest things can carry a sign. At the Isha prayer, he gathered his neighbors and, with a trembling voice, told them everything he had experienced. He described the night of paralysis, the voice, the research, and the dream that confirmed it all. The mosque fell silent. Some men cried, others simply bowed their heads. When he finished, Sheikh Abdul Qadir stood and said, "Allah speaks to each servant in the way he can understand, and when the message arrives, what defines the servant is not the fear, but what he does with the remembrance." The lights of the mosque flickered. Hassan closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and once again felt the same gentle wind from that distant night. Only this time it carried no fear, it carried purpose. Life in Medina returned to its calm rhythm, but Hassan's story had spread among students, neighbors, and worshippers at the mosque. Many came to him seeking explanations. Others came out of curiosity. On Thursday morning, while reviewing verses with his students, one of the more restless boys, named Yasir, couldn't hold back a laugh. "Sheikh, with all due respect," he said, leaning against the wall, "this all sounds exaggerated. Dreams, voices, visions. You've just been sleeping too little." The other students shot him disapproving looks, but Hassan remained calm. "Doubt is natural, Yasir. Only those who feel understand." The boy insisted. "Surely you just had a nightmare. Medicine explains all of this. There's nothing spiritual about sleeping on your back." Hassan replied serenely, "If that's so, try it. Tonight, after Maghrib, lie on your back right after eating. And tomorrow, come tell me what happened." The students exchanged glances. Yasir smiled, confident. "Deal, Sheikh. If I wake up fine, you owe me a date." Hassan returned the smile but silently prayed, "Ya Allah, show him," without harming him. At sunset, the young man took on the challenge. He dined with his friends, then lay down right afterward on his back, hands crossed over his chest, exactly as Hassan had described. At first, nothing happened. He laughed to himself and fell asleep. But hours later, he woke abruptly. The room was shrouded in shadow. He couldn't move his arms or breathe properly. His chest felt trapped beneath an invisible stone. He tried to scream, but no sound came. His heart raced, and a strange humming filled his ears. For a moment, he saw something, a dark form in the corner of the ceiling, motionless, watching him. With effort, he moved his lips and whispered, barely audibly, "A'udhu billahi minash shaitan ir-rajim." The shadow dissolved like smoke, and air returned to his lungs. He sat up trembling, drenched in sweat, his face pale and his hands cold. The next morning he appeared at the mosque. His sunken eyes revealed a sleepless night. When he found Hassan, he said nothing. He simply knelt before him, struggling to hold back tears. Hassan helped him to his feet. "What happened, Yasir?" The boy took a deep breath, his voice shaking. Something held me down. I couldn't move. I swear I heard breathing near me. I barely made it back." Hassan placed his hand on the young man's shoulder. "Now, do you understand what I tried to tell you? Not everything the eyes see is physical. Sometimes the body only reveals what the soul has forgotten." The young man wiped his face. "So it's real? That wasn't a dream?" "It was a reminder," replied the sheikh, "and you had the privilege of receiving it without being lost." The other students watched in silence. The calm on Hassan's face contrasted with Yasir's shaken expression. After a few moments, the old teacher continued, "The Prophet taught us that there are hours when the unseen world draws near. Maghrib is one of them. Whoever surrenders to sleep at that moment forgets to guard his own heart." A murmur of reverence ran through the group. Yasir, still shaken, lowered his head. "Forgive me, Sheikh. I laughed at what I didn't understand." Hassan smiled kindly. "Don't ask my forgiveness. Gratitude belongs to Allah, who showed you what arrogance hides." The sun was already rising over the city's domes as the students dispersed. Hassan remained last, watching Yasir walk away. The morning breeze blew softly, and he murmured, "Whoever is touched by the unseen never returns the same." That afternoon, when Maghrib once again painted the sky red, the same young man was seen standing beside his teacher, reciting dhikr. This time, no one went to sleep early, not from fatigue, nor from carelessness. The story of Hassan and the young Yasir spread quickly through the narrow streets of Medina. In homes, shops, and even in the bread lines, people began talking about the Maghrib warning. Many, moved by curiosity, decided to follow the Prophet's advice, and soon they noticed a change. Those who once suffered from insomnia or nighttime anxiety began to sleep more peacefully. Women said that their children, when kept awake until Isha, slept calmly, without nightmares. Merchants who used to nap after dusk felt more energy and serenity. The change, though simple, seemed to cleanse the city's air. On Friday, the mosque was full. The day's heat gave way to a pleasant breeze that swayed the curtains and carried the scent of roasted dates. Sheikh Abdul Qadir climbed the pulpit. His voice, firm and compassionate, echoed through the hallways. "Brothers and sisters," he began, "science seeks to understand what the Prophet already knew through revelation. There is wisdom in every word of the Messenger of Allah. When he warned us about sleeping after Maghrib, it wasn't superstition, it was compassion. The body is the temple of the soul, and the soul must be guarded when the sun departs and the veil of night begins." The congregation listened attentively. Some nodded quietly, others wept discreetly. "Whoever trusts in the Prophet's wisdom," continued the sheikh, raising his eyes toward the dome, "never loses balance between the physical and the spiritual." The wind blew stronger, sweeping through the entrance of the mosque. The flames of the lamps danced, and half the candles went out at once. A murmur spread through the room. For a few seconds, no one moved. Only the distant sound of the adhan from another mosque filled the sacred space. The echo of the call to prayer mingled with the rustling of the wind, creating a harmony that gave even the skeptics goosebumps. The sheikh closed his eyes for a moment and recited softly, "Allah is the light of the heavens and the earth." That phrase seemed to ignite something unseen. The air grew lighter, and a deep sense of reverence filled everyone present. The silence that followed was so profound that even the birds seemed to stop singing. Hassan, seated in the front row, felt his heart tremble. There was no doubt. That sudden breeze was a sign, not of fear but of confirmation, a reminder that every teaching of the Prophet carries wisdom untouched by time. When the prayer ended, no one wanted to leave right away. The worshippers stayed in silence, looking at one another, as if all had witnessed the same miracle. The breeze, now gentler, drifted among the mosque's arches, carrying the scent of incense and the soft sound of prayers, mingling with the falling night. For many, that moment marked the end of doubt, and for Hassan, It was the instant he understood, without needing words, that the truth had been confirmed, not by him nor by the sheikh, but by the very breath of Allah that moved through the city and through the hearts. The event in the mosque became a turning point in the life of Hassan ibn Karim. The words of Sheikh Abdul Qadir echoed for days throughout Medina, and soon scholars, pilgrims, and even travelers came seeking him, curious about the teaching of sleep. At first, Hassan felt uneasy. He didn't see himself as a scholar, only as someone who had been awakened, literally, by divine mercy. Even so, he accepted the invitation to guide small gatherings after Isha. In the mosque's courtyard, under the soft glow of the lamps, he sat among the young and the old, patiently explaining the balance between body and soul. Allah created the body with laws and the soul with signs, he would say calmly. To ignore the physical is ingratitude, to neglect the spiritual is blindness. He used simple examples: the human body that needs time to digest, the heart that needs time to remember, and the night, created not for laziness, but for reflection. Soon the entire neighborhood began calling him the Master of Maghrib, but Hassan always corrected them with a smile. It's not my knowledge. It's mercy that arrived in the form of a warning. The gatherings grew. People from other cities came to hear his talks. Doctors, intrigued by the account, began comparing the hadith with modern studies on sleep and the nervous system. One of them, Dr. Khalid, approached him one day and said, "Sheikh, there are studies showing that lying on your back after eating causes reflux, shortness of breath, and even nightmares. It's fascinating how the Prophet already knew what took us centuries to confirm." Hassan smiled and replied humbly, "Revelation is what science is still trying to remember." The word spread, and what began as a personal experience became a collective lesson. Families started having dinner earlier and staying awake after Maghrib, dedicating that time to reading, conversation, and prayer. The neighborhood, once silent right after sunset, now vibrated with voices reciting the Quran and the laughter of children. Even the elderly seemed stronger. They said they felt less fatigue, less fear of the night. One afternoon, a group of travelers from Jeddah came to thank Hassan. "We used to sleep right after Maghrib and were plagued by nightmares," said one of them. "Since we followed the advice, we've slept in peace." Hassan listened quietly, his eyes glistening. "It's not the advice that brings peace," he replied. "It's the return to what the Prophet taught, what the heart had forgotten." The elderly Sheikh Abdul Qadir now watched him from afar, content with the path his student had taken. One night, as they walked back from the mosque together, he said, "Hassan, your story was both wind and seed. The wind spread the warning. The seed took root in souls." Hassan lowered his head, moved. "I only wanted to understand, Sheikh. Allah made me an instrument without my asking." "That is how he works," the old man replied. "He turns fear into wisdom and error into a bridge." At that moment, the adhan for Isha echoed. The lamps of the minarets lit up, and the warm night breeze blew gently, swaying the leaves of the palm trees. Hassan looked up at the sky. No fear, no doubt. What had begun as a personal warning had become a movement of faith, and he understood with clarity and humility that the true miracle was not the wind, nor the vision, nor the dream. It was the collective awakening. The city that once slept early now guarded its heart, just as the Prophet had taught. And among the murmurs of prayers filling the air, Hassan whispered softly, "Alhamdulillah, whoever learns to listen never sleeps the same again." As the months passed, the transformation in Medina became visible even to the travelers who passed through. Dusk, which once plunged the city into sleepy silence, now marked the beginning of a new custom. As soon as the Maghrib was called, families gathered in their courtyards for dhikr. Mint tea steamed in cups, and soft voices filled the air with remembrance of Allah. The time between sunset and Isha took on a new meaning. Homes kept their lights on, conversations were calm, and children's laughter echoed later into the night. It was as if the entire city breathed in the rhythm of prayer. Even merchants, who once rushed to close their shops to rest, now stayed open a few extra minutes, reciting tasbih before ending the day. Hassan walked through the streets, observing each detail with quiet emotion. On one corner, a group of young men discussed the writings of Imam al-Ghazali. On another, neighbors exchanged sweets while reciting al-Fatiha. It was a new Medina, awake, serene, and wrapped in an atmosphere of tranquil faith. Sometimes he stopped in front of the mosque, watching the light of the lamps reflected on the tiles. He remembered the night when it all began, the fear, the voice, the paralysis. Now, every second of that experience made sense. What had once been fear had turned into blessing. What began as a solitary warning had become a shared example. Children who once fell asleep right after dinner now sat at their parents' feet, repeating the words of dhikr with innocence. Subhanallah, Alhamdulillah, Allahu Akbar. And Hassan smiled every time he heard the small voices echoing between the houses. Each sunset, the soft breeze moved through the streets, stirring the curtains of open windows and carrying the scent of incense and warm dates. It was the same wind that, months earlier, had awakened him, now gentle, peaceful, almost familiar. Hassan understood. It wasn't just the city that had changed, it was the souls. The sign that had touched him on that fearful night now kept hundreds of hearts watchful, and he knew this was how Allah's mercy spread, silently but eternally. The sun slowly descended over Medina's golden domes, tinting the horizon with shades of orange and violet. Hassan walked alone through the mosque courtyard, feeling the soft warmth of the stones beneath his feet. The murmur of distant prayers blended with the sound of birds returning to their nests, the same scene that months earlier had marked the beginning of his transformation. He stopped by the central fountain, watching the water reflect the sky. Each falling drop reminded him of the steady rhythm of time, the same time that had taught him patience and vigilance. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and whispered with sincere gratitude, "Thank you, Allah, for turning my fear into wisdom." The wind blew at that very moment, warm yet tender, brushing his face like a living memory. That breath seemed to say without words that the lesson was complete. He smiled, understanding that some divine warnings do not come with thunder, but with a breeze. Night fell slowly and the first lights of Aisha appeared in the distance. Hassan walked home in silence, his soul light, certain that faith is not measured by fear of the unseen, but by the willingness to listen when Allah speaks through the simplest signs. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel and watch the next video, because every hadith carries a hidden wisdom.